It was about 15 years ago, April 26, 1989. The call that changed my life. We were in quarters. We had just gotten back from a cardiac run. There were some problems with that run. My partner was convinced that it was the dispatcher's fault. So we get back to quarters and the two of them are toe-to-toe, arguing about what was going on. In the middle of this argument, the emergency line rings from a neighboring city. The dispatcher reaches over and answers the phone by hitting the speaker button on the phone, and everybody in the office hears the 911 operator asking for an ambulance to respond to the far east side of their city for a motor vehicle accident involving 3 children and a baby and bodies lying all over the road. And the owner, who happened to be there, and our dispatcher both pointed to the door and said, "Go." And we took off running for the squad. 2 minutes after the radio call that the motorcyclist was involved in this accident, I had just cleared an intersection and my foot had slipped off the air horn button on the floor of the truck. When we got through the intersection with the green light, I looked down, put my foot back on the air horn button, and as I took my sight back out through the windshield, I caught sight of the speedometer. We were right at 60 miles an hour. Scared the living daylights out of me because I didn't think we were traveling that fast. Immediately backed off the accelerator and turned my attention to the intersection in front of us. It's about a half-mile distance between the two intersections. And for that entire time of travel, or distance of travel, not one thing moved through this intersection. Nothing. I entered the left turning lane because it was open. There was no traffic there. I noticed traffic directly in front of me on both sides of the intersection and nothing coming back towards me. Like I said, nothing moved. I figured and thought that we had the right-of-way. I entered, well, the last time I looked at the light, it was green. So I disregarded the light, figuring we've got the green light, nothing's moving, I've got the right-of-way, proceeded into the intersection. I did not make a complete stop. With the green light and figuring I had the right-of-way, I didn't see the need. Never had any training up to that point that that's how an intersection is to be cleared. I had the green light. We proceeded. 3/4 of the way through the intersection, all of a sudden we've got a subcompact car in front of us. I had enough time to stiffen up at the wheel, and the next conscious thought I had was we were on our side, spinning, and the front of that unit was filling up with smoke. I do not remember the impact. The only recollection I have is just prior to the impact is seeing the face of the driver looking up at us in stark terror. Like, what are we doing there? My partner and I ended up with minor injuries. We were able to extricate ourselves out of the overturned ambulance. He started pulling out what equipment he could, and I figured if we were on our side, we must have hit whoever was in front of us. I was all over that car. I was in the driver's compartment on both sides. I was in the passenger compartment on both sides. I found nobody in the car. We found the driver laying approximately 10 feet away from the car in the dark shadows. The accident happened about 10:10 p.m. Only reason why I found her there is because a bystander happened to see her and screamed. And when I looked in the direction of the scream, I saw a woman standing there with a hand over her mouth and pointing behind me. And when I turned around, there was the driver laying face down in the grass. She had a passenger in the back seat, and the way we struck the car on an angle, we pushed the wreckage right around her. A 6-year-old little girl sitting behind the driver. I never saw her. Everyone else that first arrived on scene never saw her. It wasn't until she was able to work that foot somehow off the seat and down below the wreckage, and this guy just happened to be walking past the car and looked in and saw it. Took him 45 minutes to cut her out. Mom didn't make it. When she was tossed out of the car, she ended up with chest and head injuries, ended up with a torn aorta. It was kind of evident to us when we went to intubate her that all we got was a a rush of blood out of the ET tube. My partner and I knew then. And both of us just broke down in the squad and said, look, we got into this business to save lives, not take them. We didn't know for sure. Nobody had pronounced her, but we knew. You don't have those kind of injuries and survive them. Ultimately, I was held responsible for the accident only because in a criminal proceeding, which has how this was presented from the prosecutor, the negligence of a victim has no bearing whatsoever. The prosecutor even admitted in court that if she would have survived the accident, she would have been ticketed for not yielding the right-of-way to an emergency vehicle. Didn't matter. Because it was a criminal proceeding, the entire responsibility was put on my shoulders. Despite my colleagues, despite my attorney saying, look, they don't put paramedics in jail for doing their job, I could already tell by the way that things were going after that first day of court, how the prosecutor was acting, how the judge was reacting. I was going to prison. There was no doubt in my mind. I had spent 7 months in prison. Actually, it was 4 days shy of 7 months. My life was a lot different when I came out of prison. I was no longer doing what I loved to do. I was taken eventually out of the fire station and put into another position. The court has said you've got 2 weeks to find gainful employment. And you walk into an employer with a resume and you fill out that application and you write down your name and your address and phone number and all that neat little stuff. And the very question that they ask on every application, have you ever been convicted of? And in little itty-bitty letters it says, if yes, please explain. I'll tell you right now, there were a lot of people that cared less what that explanation was. Convicted felon? Give me a break. There's the door, pal. Those were the nice ones. Because you're a convicted felon. You now have this mystique about you that for some reason you shouldn't be functioning in society. So it was very difficult to find employment, let alone a decent job to help support the family. All my roles within the house, with being a father and husband, at least to me, were a lot different than before. With my job at the fire department and moonlighting, and yeah, I was away from home a lot, but things, the way our schedules worked out, I was always home for at least that one day before I went back on the shift. So I was still home for probably 2 days a week, and I didn't always work 24s at the ambulance company, so I was still home quite a bit. There was a lot of interaction with the kids. We were able to do things a lot more. We were able to do things together. It wasn't all that difficult. Once I got home, budgets were very tight, still had bills to pay, working sometimes 2 and 3 part-time jobs, which kept me away from home a lot. Inside, I'm no different than before. It took me a while to realize that. But having that mystique, unless somebody knows you, you've got that label. The death in this accident will never, ever be acceptable to me. Never. Right now, I'm unemployed. I was a cardiac tech in a Cleveland hospital for about 9.5 years. Thoroughly enjoyed that because I like cardiology. And we tried to make a move to Tennessee, and that just kind of blew up on our face. So I'm back home now, and it looks like I'll be going back to school instead of going back to work. Knowing what I know now, knowing that hindsight's 20/20, I wish there would have been some type of formal education, EVOC course, training of some kind that says, look, this is how you're supposed to do things. You come up to the intersection, whether you think it's clear or not, whether you think the light's green or not, you clear it lane by lane, and you make sure that nothing is moving. And if somebody decides they're not going to respect you being there, then you're able to stop. At least at that point, you're following the law, you're following the due regard that every state has in place, And if you get hit, then it's not your fault. You did what you were supposed to do. You used your reasoning skills to say, look, this is the most dangerous situation I can be putting myself in. I'm going to make sure that I get through it. I went wrong that night in a couple of different ways. First of all, when the call came in, 3 children and a baby and bodies lying all over the road. Get choked up a little bit thinking about it. I let the situation of the call dictate what was going on in here. I had used the terminology when I gave my statement to the police officer that we were pumped up. Well, that was used against me, thinking that I was either on drugs, drinking, or both. It was not taken as the adrenaline rush, the fight or flight syndrome that we experience when the tones go off and we're alerted to whatever it is we have to do. We left quarters with that adrenaline rush not being under control. But if you don't put it under control before you get behind the wheel, I guarantee you're going to be out of control. That was evident when we went through the intersection, a half a mile from the accident intersection, and I caught my speed at 60. Speed limit on that road was 45. Now, 15 miles an hour doesn't sound that bad, but when you start getting into physics and maths and all that kind of stuff, that 15 miles an hour makes a huge difference when you start looking at injuries and everything from a crash doing that kind of speed. And that's why I backed off the accelerator. The biggest thing that I could say is slow down, follow the speed limit. If you're going to use your lights and sirens, use your lights and sirens, but they're a tool. Don't let them dictate how you're operating. Don't let that siren become intoxicating and let it fuel that fight or flight syndrome, because it does. So you got to slow down, you've got to follow the speed limit, you've got to clear every intersection. And if that means you're running in town and you've got 15 intersections to get through, well, I'm sorry, you've got to clear all 15 of them. And you've got to make sure that you get there, because you're not going to help anybody if you don't get there. It's quite evident to me that I made a mistake, I was wrong, and I caused the death of another human being. Look, you may not think it's going to happen to you. I didn't think it was going to happen to me either. But in a split second, everything changes. And you have no idea who it's going to be that's going to happen to. Being able to put this incident behind me has been difficult. It has everything to do with who I was before the accident, having a genuine love for people and wanting to be out there at their worst moment and thinking I could be able to do something about it. And then in the process of trying to do that, I killed somebody. That's never gonna go away. That's never gonna set well with me. My big problem is forgiving myself. I'm not so sure that I've done that. There's gonna be a lot of people out there in this profession that aren't going to heed or listen to what was said, and they're gonna have to learn the hard way. You better pay attention to the intersection, because it's the most dangerous place you're gonna find yourself. And like I said, if you've got 15 intersections to go through to get where you're going, whether it's transport or whether it's responding, then your risk has just gone up 15 times. The traffic light, I don't care if you got lights and sirens on that rig and you're using them, that traffic light means everything. If that traffic light's green and you didn't see it go green, it's getting ready to turn red. So what does that mean to you? You better be ready to stop that rig. And if you're doing anything other than paying attention to the road and you have an accident, I'll guarantee you that an attorney somewhere is going to use it against you. Your attention has to be to what you're doing. Let your partner or your partners, how many ever people you run with, let them worry about the scene and think about what you guys might be getting into. Think about the equipment you need. Your attention has to be what you're doing. The repercussions and the danger are to everybody, to yourself, to the people that are in that rig with you, to the people that are on the road with you. You've got a lot of responsibility in your hands, and what I mean is on that steering wheel and how you're operating that vehicle. It just isn't you.